it's art. I mean, I mean, we're sitting in a bar in Berlin at 3 a.m. We can argue about that, but I don't know, and I wouldn't preclude the discussion, but I think architecture can be extremely confident, not to say satisfied, that architecture is more than enough, and you don't get any more accolades if somebody says it's art. On the other hand, I was just thinking of an article that somebody put on my desk, the Art Forum. There's a reason. So there are all these articles floating around of various merit or demerit on the Getty stuff. And there's one in the recent Art Forum. I mean, that's an art magazine, an artist magazine. There's an analysis of a series of projects from the point of view, really, of an art critic.
Are you speaking of the Pacific Standard show at the Getty?
Yeah. And all of its...
all the other shows.
Many manifestations. So there are venues that pick up on that discourse and seem to be interested in qualifying architecture either better or worse as it is asymptotic to an artistic quotient or it's something else. And that's a very old argument. I mean, even in contemporary terms, I think Hannes Meyer was sitting in the Bauhaus and talking about function and economy and efficiency, and Le Corbusier was getting ripped for taking a different point of view. I don't know whether you know that piece in Defense of Architecture, and that architecture has its intrinsic meanings that will never be defined by the new Sacklicht. You know, everybody know what the new Sacklicht is. It's not so new anymore. But this is a term, a German term. You speak German? Say it.
Sachlich.
Yeah, that's it. and what it means or purports to mean is that at the advent or the point of advent of a modern architecture, and this is a hypothesis, I think it's prima facie not true, but it was supported over a number of years, that there's a kind of objectivity that one could reach. Oh, here's a column. Well, for structural reasons, the diameter needs to be, because the rebar is so and so.
Determined.
That's right. That's a good word for it. So that architecture comes what the practical operations necessitate, and this was called in the Bauhaus this new objectivity, and so this was a slogan for a while. But I think there was a split among modern architects. There clearly was.
Sure.
Between the Hannes Meyer types and probably the Le Corbusier types, although they're sliding, it's not a neat. Yeah. Right.
I want to ask maybe one more question, and maybe we'll see if the folks here have questions. And that is, you have faculty from all over the world, but I'm thinking of the students actually. They come there at SCIARC for a period of time and they go away. They have the experience, presumably, that you described of investigations, and they develop strategies for that. And then they go wherever they go in the world. Do you feel that kind of environment or that kind of investigative, speculative strategy, and it's not a strategy, it's whatever strategy they, I guess, cull from their education, do you feel that there's any imperative to operate in some unilateral global way, or do you feel that the educational experience allows them to interpret wherever they end up in different regionally defined ways? Is there any overarching global consistency, or is it pluralistic, and someone ends up back in Malaysia and someone ends up in Tokyo and someone's in Berlin, and it can be responsive to all those different
That's
features?
a great question. It's a fantastic question, and I'm not sure that there is there's any kind of perfect answer to that. I was a few months ago in Abu Dhabi and Dubai talking to some planning agencies, and I gave some talk, and this is Dubai, and the head guy raised his hand and he said, "Hey Moss, how can we do this?" Is, you can see what they're building there, obviously. Yeah. How can we do something which conforms to the context, the lifestyle, the way of seeing and thinking and feeling that belongs in a fundamental, not necessarily fundamentalist sense, to this part of the world.
Which might be so different from somewhere else.
We're not doing that. Right. The guy who runs the architecture school in Tsinghua University in Beijing just sent his kid to SCIARC. And I think the supposition is that there is now, this would be Schumacher's premise, that there's a generic language of architecture, and that if you want to matter in the discourse of architecture, you have to be a subscriber to that. And whether there's an alternative voice that would insist that Mexico is not the same as Shanghai, which is not the same as Istanbul, which is not the same as Berlin. I think the manifestations of that get to be very staid and predictable, because the architecture very often reverts to typologies that don't seem to belong either, so that if you want to do something that belongs to, let's say, Mexico or Mexico City, you find something which is a piece of history, or this is often done, and you replicate it, or its shape, or its color, and so on and so on. When we worked on the Mexico City Library, which we didn't win. We were second in that competition a few years ago, and we made an argument, actually, that what we were doing wasn't vernacular in a traditional sense, but it belonged very particularly to a culture, or to an antecedent culture. And what we did, and we looked at Zibichaltun and Chichen Itza and some of those, which arguably don't much touch me. But you start somewhere and you try to build a case in terms of the kind of space that they build, its relationship, its cosmological issues, and so on. You try to bend that around a little bit. I'm not sure it works. I think it was an initiative, and I think it's worth thinking about.
But there was an intention to do that.
An intention that there is a value both in recognizing what is consistent and recognizing what's different, and that it isn't, and it shouldn't be one or the other. I remember we tried to do another competition, which we won, and then everybody went crazy, and then we did another one. And this was in St. Petersburg, the Miriinsky, which they actually just finished. Probably not the best.